Live to Greg Sheridan, foreign editor at The Australian. Greg, what have you made of the madness in the United States over the last week?
Well, Kieran, it's a very difficult issue. The footage of Floyd dying is the most confronting and terrible thing you could ever see. The actions of the white police officer are simply unspeakable, and it's so unambiguous and so dramatic. You can see why it's caused such a massive reaction. Having said that, I don't think the protests look as though they're going anyplace good, and the violence that has accompanied them is still more likely to help Donald Trump and the Republicans in November than anyone else. And the history of race riots and violence, civil violence in the United States, is it helps the law and order party, and it doesn't do much good for the cause that it's meant to be backing. So this is the most widespread racial violence we've seen since the 1960s, although the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles were more intense within Los Angeles and led to a greater loss of life there.
And now there is, as you say, a long history of this type of protest, of the violence. But as you say, the Rodney King issue, this is nationwide. Is it? I mean, obviously a lot depends on how Donald Trump manages it from here, but you believe, as you pointed out there, it could actually work in his favour. He's certainly trying to do that by saying he's the law and order president.
Absolutely. That has been the history of all these things. The great anti-Vietnam protests of the 1960s led to the election of Richard Nixon. The Nixon protests continued, and he won by a landslide in 1972. Barack Obama was interesting not only because he was an African American, but he was the first Northern liberal Democrat to win the presidency since John F. Kennedy. Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton ran very much as Southern conservatives. Bill Clinton indeed broke his campaign off to go back to Arkansas to oversee the execution of a black man just to show that he was in favour of the death penalty. So the electoral consequences of this are very unclear. The other thing is, although this footage was shocking and utterly confronting, I don't believe it does actually represent the pattern of most American life. Most African Americans are middle class, and they don't suffer daily shocking racism. Other racial minorities have done extraordinarily well in the United States, Asians, Indians, Chinese, and so on. And that wouldn't be the case if it was a society which locked people out on the basis of race. I myself have lived in the United States on 4 separate occasions, and I never saw any racial confrontation. I never heard anyone make a racist remark. The very fact that America is convulsed over this shocking incident shows that it is not an America in which racial violence against blacks is normalised or accepted, carried out by official agencies or by private individuals.
We've seen the clashes, they've continued again, broken curfews and so on. How precarious is this for the Republic, for the United States, one of our great allies, but it looks really a very precarious situation right now. How concerned are you about this for the makeup, the fabric of the US?
Well, Kieran, I wouldn't want to trivialise it in any way. This is a serious matter. People are very angry. But, the United States has been here before, and it's come back on the rebound very, very strongly. There were shocking race riots in the 60s, which did lead to some civil rights progress, but it also led to a much more self-confident conservative majority, including Democrats, to get very effective policing. You see, if policing retreats, if policing becomes very soft and retreats from the full enforcement of the law, the people who suffer most from that are poor people from racial minorities in disadvantaged communities, because then they have no protection against the criminals and the gangs. I mean, the truth is black men are infinitely more likely to die at the hands of a criminal than they are to die at the hands of a policeman. So this is a very serious matter, and I think Donald Trump is sort of uniquely ill-equipped to pour soothing balm on these troubles as a president. But on the other hand, I think America is a long way away from teetering on the brink of collapse. If the civil disorder continues, then the pendulum of sympathy will swing away from shock and outrage at this terrible murder of this black man, and it will swing against the people doing the demonstrations. I mean, there's a kind of iron law in politics, really. The bigger the demonstration you get, the worse you do at the ballot box at the next time. Do you remember when John Howard deployed Australian troops to Iraq? We got the biggest demonstrations we'd ever seen in our history, and John Howard increased his majority at the next election. So this is a very unpredictable situation. I'm not at the point of thinking that America is on the brink of collapse or anything like that. It's a very disturbing and unhappy situation.
We've only got about a minute left, but I guess the other thing to touch on, and you did in part allude to it, but it's the confluence of various, not just the incident that you spoke of in Minneapolis, but the fact that it's come at this time of great economic dislocation via the pandemic.
Yeah, this is a really double tragedy for the United States. I mean, before the pandemic, poverty rates were going down for blacks, incarceration rates were going down. I mean, here's an irony. Donald Trump was delivering for black Americans. He was giving young black men jobs, which is the best route out of poverty and the best route out of despair. That's all been knocked absolutely off course by this virus. And that certainly does make it much harder, much harder to deal with. I still think America has enormous regenerative power, and I'm confident America will come back. But the coincidence of the virus and this incident and all the unemployment and angst that the virus has caused makes it twice as difficult as it would otherwise be. But I'd say to you, Kieran, honestly, an incident like that, filmed in that way, would have caused a reaction at any time, and would cause a reaction if such a hideous thing ever happened in Australia.